All righty, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight for the penultimate session in our spring webinar series. We're so thrilled to have so many of you logged on with us this evening. This series is generously presented by the Arvin L. Gottlieb Foundation with support from the Mid-America Regional Council and the Missouri Department of Conservation. After the program, please visit us at deeproots.org, where you can find out more about where to buy native plants, attend more educational program, sign up for our newsletter, and more. Please take a moment to locate the chat and Q&A features at the bottom of your screen. We will take a few minutes at the end of tonight's session to answer any questions that you all may have for Matt. You can put those questions in the Q&A tool and any other comments or concerns you have in the chat. We'll also have a poll question pop up at the beginning of the session. That'll just pop up right on your screen and you can select your answers so that Matt can get a good idea of where the audience is at. We are so pleased to have Matt Bunch here with us this evening. Matt's love for native plants grew from his parents and grandparents, and he loves to garden with his family. Matt has been working in horticulture since 1994. From 2004 to 2013, Matt worked with Powell Gardens as a native plant landscape specialist and horticulturist. Matt is now with the Giving Grove and has been there since 2013. By an informal count, Matt estimates that he has planted close to 10,000 trees. So please welcome us in joining Matt to the virtual stage. Thank you, Matt.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary, and thank you for using the word penultimate. Yeah, a little bit more about me. So yeah, I've been in the landscape gardening world. Well, actually, in the paid gardening world since 1994, but been gardening for much longer than that. So some of my initial gardening started out as landscaping and working at a nursery, working with all sorts of plants. Very few native plants at the time because most of them were your typical cultivated daylilies and hostas. Occasionally there was a native plant or two thrown in. But then after coming to Kansas City and working at the Discovery Center and really getting to understand the beauty of our native flora and how functional it is. These are plants that predate us. They grew up with the animals, with the fauna around. So I really took that in and took it to heart and have really ever since that job at the Discovery Center from 2004 to 2008, I've fallen in love with our native plants. And since then I've been working in the realm of edibles and fruit trees, but still have my fingers and my heart in the native plant world. So before we start the presentation, however, we do have a little survey that Mary is going to go ahead and send out to you all. Just kind of, what are your biggest maintenance challenges in your native plant landscape? And so, yeah, just kind of, and this is great because then I can sort of gauge how to give this presentation a little bit better here. Okay, right now, Annual Weeds is winning. We have a few others in here. Confusion about garden cleanup. So that's, yeah. Reseeding volunteers, woody saplings invading. How much more time do we?
I'll give it another 5 or 10 seconds real quick.
Okay.
Almost everyone's got their answers in.
Very good. Okay, by far annual weeds definitely outranks everything with 45%. Confusion about garden cleanup, certainly. The reseeding volunteers, yeah, that's third, and so we will address all of these. And the woody saplings, that's actually one of one of my pet peeves in my personal landscape, and I think actually in other landscapes that I help with, because they are everywhere. So I guess, can I share these results? Is that how that?
I shared them, so y'all
Oh,
should have
okay.
been able to view them. Let me
Oh,
know
okay,
in the
great.
chat if folks weren't able to, but yes. Yeah, there they are one more time.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I think I will go ahead and share my screen and get the presentation up. Okay, well, yes, thank you all again for joining, and hopefully at the end of this presentation, we'll all be a little bit smarter gardeners. Now, I feel like sometimes I still make a lot of the same mistakes, and I'm sure we all do. And some of these things, it's just how much time can we devote out into the garden? And sometimes life gets in the way of gardening. But so let's talk about some of these things that will make our native plant landscapes more beautiful, more functional, and hopefully a little bit easier to manage. So a little bit of the overview. We're going to talk about just some of the tools that will help make gardening easier. And if you're not actually using any of these tools, you may want to. And then we'll talk about managing the both for ecology and the aesthetics in the garden by the season. And then while we can't talk about all of the plants that you and I want to talk about, we will talk about certain plants that many of us may all love, some of us kind of love begrudgingly, but plants that are probably in your and mine native landscapes. So all of us, I think we come to this mission a little bit for various reasons. You know, some of it is for the wildlife, to draw in birds that eat the seeds or birds that eat the caterpillars. Some of it is expressly for butterflies. And some of it is for just the beauty, the sheer unusual beauty that we have in the Midwest. Some of it is kind of sort of a sense of needing to restore the landscape, to repair the landscape, to kind of heal the landscape. And then for others, it is a sense of place. Here in the Midwest and in the summertime, we can count on cicadas, and we can count on the Monarda flowering, and we can count on bumblebees buzzing. So having those native plants helps create that sense of place. So we all have good reasons to garden with native plants. But in order to garden with native plants, and honestly, in order to garden just in general, you do need the right tools. And so these are the kinds of things that I really, I always bring out into the garden with me. Now, I don't always bring 2 shovels because one shovel oftentimes does the work, but I do want to talk about what these are good for. First off, our flat spade I don't know how many times I end up using this when I'm dividing out perennials. This is a wonderful tool for getting the roots and not a whole lot of soil, and for breaking up those clumps of somewhat stubborn plants. And so that's our flat spade here. The sharpshooter with the long point. It's also another favorite of mine for being out and dealing with all of the woody saplings. So it is one of my challenges in a native landscape, and I find it to be a challenge in native landscapes that I've helped manage are all of the woody interlopers. Mine in particular here at home are redbuds and silver maples. But out there in other parts of the world, it's things like white mulberry. White mulberry will just show up everywhere. Hackberry will just show up everywhere. And now, of course, we're seeing those cultivated exotics, now invasive exotics. Well, of course, there are shrub honeysuckles, but then there are also the calorie pears that will also start showing up in some of our managed native landscape beds. So then we have the hand cultivator, which is this is just my all-around tool for sowing seeds, for grubbing out weeds, for everything. So this is probably, if you don't own one of these tools, I suggest you invest in one. The hand pruners are perfect for any sort of errant stems that are maybe falling over that you don't need anymore. Good for deadheading, and of course they're good for pruning trees and shrubs. And then the head shears, especially this time of year, I'm constantly using head shears out in the garden. And this is not for woody hedges, but it is for things like aromatic asters and New England asters, things like that. Maybe you've noticed that many plants have shot up about 4 to 8 to 12 inches of growth here in the past 2 to 3 days. So head shears are very important this time of year, and don't be afraid to shear some of your plants back. And we'll talk specifically about what plants can tolerate this kind of shearing and what plants will not necessarily tolerate it. And then lastly, and this isn't pictured, but it's a leaf rake, and very elemental for the spring cleanup phase of really any perennial garden landscape. But yes, definitely, we do still clean up some leaves during the in the native plant landscape. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So we just kind of went through March into April, and really for March, March is always kind of the big cut down, the big cleanup. And while I know with native plant landscapes, we're also wanting to save some stems. We want to save some leaves. We want to keep some sort of debris on the ground for some of the native insects that are overwintering, in some cases in cocoons, in some case in some state of pupation. We still want to have some of that dead and desiccated foliage in there. However, you do have to remove a certain percentage of some of the leaf material, as well as the garden debris. And so what this looks like kind of year in and year out throughout March and sometimes early April is just getting out there with the head shears, and that entire herbaceous layer is cut down and really almost to the crown. Now at this point, you're leaving some here on the bare ground, leaving some leaves, leaving some stems on the bare ground, but you're taking out maybe 50 to 60% of the debris out of the garden. Now, if we were to leave all of that debris in the garden, we would risk, well, one, it would probably get a little bit messy. And two, we do risk actually rotting out the crown of some of these more tender plants that we're actually trying to cultivate in the native plant landscape. So don't underestimate spring cleanup, and also don't worry about it too much. It needs to be done, but leave a certain percentage of your leaf material, of your stems, back into the garden. And so here is actually another photo from that same garden. And so you'll see on here on the left-hand side with the mountain mint, and let's see, I think that's the cliff goldenrod. So you'll see this is pretty much bare soil. There's a little bit of old wood chip mulch and a few stems there, but this is bare soil. And you actually notice what's happening here in the bare soil. We have all sorts of little weeds that are germinating. There's a little walnut right there. Looks like we have a little bit of dead nettle right in there. And then we have just, and to be quite honest, most of these are native plants that have sowed their seeds and are springing up. A little bit of blue sage and some other things, but you can see the sheer amount of weeds that are just freely germinating in that soil. And over here where we have our penstemon and some violets and a miscellaneous sedge that I did not plant. It looks like it might be Carex blanda, not sure. So if you look at this, there are far less seeds germinating within this within the leafy mulched area. So once again, a very good reason to leave some leaves because those leaves will actually shade out those new seedlings that are getting started. So you don't have to go in with your dyed black mulch or just your regular brown wood chip mulch. You can just keep some of those oak leaves behind. And a little note about the violets. And I had a good conversation with somebody very recently. We were debating whether a weed was a weed in a certain place, and of course, a weed is always a plant out of place. But we both decided that the violets could stay, and the violets, not only being a native plant, but they do make a great ground cover. And once we're ready to get rid of violets, you go ahead and you dig them up and you make room for something else. But in the interim, violets are perfectly fine to leave where they germinate. So as we go through the growing season, and here you can see with my head shears, they're kind of flopped on some dead nettle there. So right now we are currently at a very active stage of growth on a lot of our plants. They would be much more active right now if we were in the 70 to 80 degree range, but they're still growing quite fast. So this is a perfect time to be managing a lot of plants within the aster family. And so these are not only the aster species like New England aster, like aromatic aster, but then we start talking about some of the goldenrod species as well. So here in the center photo, you can see the New England aster, and you can see about how tall it is. Well, you just take that down by about a half. and just take the head shears to it. So what this does is the plant will then start branching out a little bit fuller. About 2 to 3 weeks from now, you'll want to take it down by about a third. So it's going to grow up to twice this size. You'll take it down to about a third of that level. And then you could probably do that one more time, really up until about July 4th is kind of the stopping point for shearing back a lot of asters in our area. Is because if you shear these back too late, you actually will not get a good floral display later on, as we're talking September into October. So we do have to be cognizant about when we shear these things, and don't shear them too late in the season. So the list is actually rather extensive on what can get sheared, and actually for those of you who have land out in the country or are familiar with fields getting hayed, if you think about the way a field gets hayed, and then later on as you get into the fall season, many of those perennials that were cut very short and used for hay very early on, they are flowering. They will be flowering in that September, October time frame. So just think of that as a little bit of an analogy. You're kind of, well, you're making hay while the sun is shining. But many of the plants that can handle this are the goldenrods, the perennial sunflowers. And as you look here, this is the willow leaf sunflower in the background. This is a plant that naturally will get 10 to 12 feet tall. And so that is more than most of our gardens can handle. It's definitely best for the backyard, not the front yard. Now you can trim these 2 to 3 different times from sort of May to very early July, and keep these at a lower height. And we're talking 6 to 8 feet tall, as opposed to 10 to 12 feet tall. And in the process, you'll be getting more branches, which will spawn more flower buds, which will then have a greater floral show in the fall. So sunflowers, ironweed, and like I mentioned, asters. There are some plants in the mint family you can do this with as well. Blue sage being probably the easiest one. But with most of our plants in the mint family, they actually flower a little bit earlier. And so you can't really shear those down and get a good floral display. So I'm thinking of things like Monarda, which just the wild bee balm, Monarda fistulosa. Shearing it back, you have a very, very short window in which you can shear it back. And actually that window is already left. So because Monarda fistulosa, the wild bee balm, tends to flower anywhere from late May, it probably won't happen this year, but into very early July. So the ship has sailed for shearing something like that. And then things in the bean family, there are very few good perennials that we grow in the bean family that can handle a shearing and then flower, and they would be some of those late flowering bean family relatives like senna. And senna is the Maryland senna is one that gets to be rather robust and large, about 6 feet tall, and flowers in August into September. You can shear that back this time of year more with a hand pruner rather than head shears. But then you would just get more branching and a much better floral display, and it's not going to be as rank or as large of a plant. So really get out there with the shears on some of these species. And, you know, if you don't feel quite comfortable doing the whole plant, let's say, maybe you do half a clump and you kind of compare what the New England aster, let's say, is doing on the side you didn't shear versus the side that you sheared. So that's sort of an introductory way to become a little bit more comfortable with the plant. Another thing is when you shear all of these, just let the clippings fall. Let the clippings fall back to the ground. Let them provide some shade for the soil and let them just decompose and create organic material back into the flower bed. So here we have some photos of the shears that had been engaged throughout the year, and so you'll see the aromatic asters there, and those were managed to kind of roundy moundy. So while the plant itself is fairly well behaved, it doesn't tend to grow too tall. On wet years and in good garden soils, those will sometimes get 3 to 4 feet tall. So you do have to manage them at a little bit lower height, especially if you're going to have them along a border. And so these were sheared a couple different times, and here they are. And sort of this is kind of a mid-October. You can see the frost on the grass, and of course these will last well after that first frost, and oftentimes they'll last into 2 or 3 hard freezes, and they'll still be flowering. On the left-hand side here, this was just head shears used to engage plants that were encroaching on a pathway. And this is one of my pet peeves when I'm kind of walking on a sidewalk or in a public garden somewhere, and there are plants that are kind of, I like plants, but I don't sometimes want to be so close up and personal with the plants. I don't want them whipping me in the face, or in some cases, maybe a tick is just hanging out there on the edge of the plant wanting to jump onto you. So keeping clear pathways is very important in any sort of landscape, but I think especially in a native plant landscape, because I feel that there is a stigma that can be attached to native plants, and if we make native plants a little bit more presentable, we can kind of work against that stigma. So let's talk a little bit about the use of reseeding annuals. We're kind of going and talking more plant by plant now, less some of the maintenance, but these reseeding annuals can actually help you maintain your garden a little bit better. And there are many reseeding native annuals. These are just a few of them. But these help fill in the spaces between your perennials. These are the things that will make sure that your garden is still native and it is not weedy. Now, unfortunately, pretty much all of these plants are warm season annuals. Cool season native annuals, we have a few, but they're not that plentiful, and can be a little bit more difficult to use in the landscape. But these are all warm season native annuals. So snow on the mountain here really doesn't start to emerge until the soil gets quite warm. But this stuff is great for filling that newly planted landscape. If you're planting at a foot or 18 inches between plants, realize that it may take 2 years before those perennials actually fill in. So have something that can be a little bit of a nurse plant. However, you also have to be a little bit careful when you're using some of your reseeding annuals, because some of these can be quite robust. And some of them also can sow their seeds with reckless abandon. And so you need to be judicious in your editing with some of these annuals, but they are very good and very helpful because a lot of these they do a great service for the pollinators, and aesthetically they are quite beautiful. So yeah, great for filling spaces, great for floral displays. Um, and so here we have the use of partridge pea. And this is partridge pea in the midst of a planting of little blue stem and Indian grass. So the partridge pea, one, it helps fill that space, provides a beautiful yellow flower that is actually pollinated through something called buzz pollination, which is something that various species of bumblebees they'll grab a hold of the flower and buzz their wings to get the pollen off of the flower. And the other thing is they are a nitrogen fixing legume. So they're actually making more nitrogen available to the plants around and supporting themselves by producing nitrogen. So this has long been a favorite of mine, but I do know that if you let this go, if you let all of the seeds germinate and don't go through and edit out a few of those seedlings when you see them, that you can truly have a problem in some areas. So you just need to know what you're looking at. And in some cases, what I do with my plants here at home, I wait until they get to the seed forming form. And so the pods are almost dry, and I will go ahead and cut those off at the base, still leaving the root system intact because I want those roots to break up. I want them to actually add to the soil, but I will take the rest of the plant out. And that way I'm not getting as many seeds dropping on the ground year in and year out. Now I realize this may be, you know, a little bit of maintenance here and there but it keeps my partridge pea levels low, but just enough that I have them year in and year out, because I really love the plant and I don't want it to go away, but I also don't want it to go crazy. Now let's talk about some of the spreading plants, because we do have a lot of native plants that they don't know their boundaries too well. You have to love them for it because they will grow in a lot of places. But in some cases, you do need to beat them back a little bit. Here is the clustered mountain mint, which is one of my absolute favorites because it brings in so many different species of pollinators. This one just happens to have a lot of honeybees, but I do see a wasp and I don't know the species of wasp up there, and then there is a butterfly up there in the corner. But you do have to keep these in check. And so this is a matter of taking that flat spade that I showed earlier and just getting in and chunking out pieces. And this is one that if you have any entomologist friends, they would love this plant because they could identify all of those different species. And as a matter of fact, pass it on to your entomologist friends so they can identify those species for you. And then there are other things that spread. So the mountain mints, that's the Pycnanthemum genus. And so there's the slender mountain mint and hairy mountain mint and clustered mountain mint are kind of the three that you see around in retail. But then there are the perennial sunflowers. And in some cases, perennial sunflowers will actually eat up a lot more real estate than you have room for. So if you are going to delve into perennial sunflowers, do make sure that you have a little bit of real estate for them. And in some cases, there are some species of perennial sunflower, like the ashy sunflower, that is somewhat allelopathic to the plants around it, meaning that it actually is toxic to the plants that surround it. There are others like roundleaf groundsel, which is definitely a favorite of mine because it's a wonderful ground cover. But some people seem to take umbrage with it because it does creep around. But I'm kind of all for that. I have a very mixed yard here with lots of dry shade, and roundleaf groundsel ekes out an existence and provides a good ground cover year round. Canada anemone is another one. And if you want to see a good stand of Canada anemone right now, go over to the Deep Roots demonstration bed, actually, at the Discovery Center. It's a very wonderful plant, but it spreads by rhizome, and it kind of gets a little bit everywhere. So it does need editing if you're going to plant some companion plants around it. Showy evening primrose is yet another one of those, which is very similar to Canada anemone in its habit. Just creeps along the ground and shows up feet away from where the mother plant was, but it's all by root. Some of these others, like obedient plant, it's easily managed. It's not called obedient because it's easily managed, however. It's called obedient because the flower heads, you can move them around and they will actually stay put after you move the flower head. And there's common milkweed, and a lovely plant. I have it at home, but it does run. And there are so many more. So when delving into native plants, you need to understand their habit and know when you need to rein them in. And that's where you can share with your friends, or maybe they just go to the compost pile. But regardless, these are all worthy of cultivation, just with a little bit of an asterisk. And another thing with that asterisk too, and this is a resource that I do think is great, is Missouri Wildflower Nurseries, their four-star rating for many of our native plants. 4 stars mean it's front of the yard, and it is very showy, and it behaves itself. And then you go down from 4 stars to 3 stars on down. So I would use that as a guide if you don't know your native plants too well and know their habit. So back to sort of dividing some of these plants out, and especially the plants that you really want more of. So now is an absolute great time to be doing some of these divisions. We have cool, wet weather. The plants are hardly going to notice that you have taken half of their clump away and transported it to some other part of the garden. So get out and do that if you've been meaning to do some dividing. Typically, this is a little bit too late to be doing it in the season, but we're in for a spate of cool, wet weather, and really you just don't want the stress on the plants. So get out there and start dividing. Spreading species are more amenable to dividing. So the previous slide, all of those plants, very easy to transplant and take divisions. This is also true of now grasses, rushes, and sedges, and the reason I have this photo up is these are all soft rush, which were just divided out. This was a day and a half project to divide out soft rush, but from we ended up with 4 times as many soft rush at the end of the day, and we needed that many soft rush to fill in the landscape. So it was a very good way to get cheap plants. And we dug up the mother plant, we divided it into half, and then divided those halves into other halves. And then from one clump of rush, we ended up with 4 clumps. So this can also be done with many of the prairie grasses, although for the most part, there's probably not too much of a need to do this with prairie grasses because they tend to reseed somewhat heavily. But I've done this with, done it with some other prairie grasses. I'm blanking on Eastern Gamma grass. I was able to do that with that. Now, if you're trying to take divisions, Baptisia is not going to divide very well, just so you know. It can be done, but you probably won't be very successful doing that just because of the way the plant grows, and it has eyes as such, and it has very, very deep roots and very solid roots that they don't break apart that easily. But then when taking divisions, you really kind of want to stop that after mid-September. At some point, now you could just divide off of a plant to decrease the size of the plant, and the mother plant that stays in the soil will live. But any divisions that you take to transplant out, you are kind of rolling the dice because they may not live. They may not have enough time to get those roots established in the soil, and especially with colder soil temperatures before we get into the winter. So let's talk a little bit about some of the reseeding perennials that we have, and how they can be a little bit troublesome. Of course, many of our native plants, they reseed themselves. Some we can tolerate, others we kind of can't. And so this is just a small list of some of those. But the criteria is, and when I say almost all seeds tend to germinate, sometimes it just feels like all seeds tend to germinate. But spread by the wind, and the plant habit is tall or spreading and fast growing. So something that is tall, spreading, and fast growing means that it's going to shade out some of the other plants in your native plant landscape. So you'll want to, if you have these plants, use them with caution. So New England aster, aromatic aster, pretty much, there are a lot of asters. There are some like the stiff-leafed aster that it's rare that you'll find a seedling on a stiff-leafed aster. But then there are others like the goldenrods, the stiff goldenrod, and the showy goldenrod. Some of the other goldenrods, like cliff goldenrod, are fairly well behaved. And then there's wild bee balm. Every year, I probably pull out about 50% of my bee balm out of the yard and leave the other 50%. I know what's going to happen. I know that they're going to reseed. I love the plant so much, though, that I don't want to get rid of it. I just don't want it taking over. And so be prepared to, not that these are throwaway plants, but be prepared to get rid of a few of them. The same with ironweeds too. Nothing has that same purple color as an ironweed. However, if left to its own devices, it will start to germinate everywhere. And realizing with all of this that there's a great benefit for wildlife, especially a lot of our native pollinators. But in a sort of managed landscape, especially a home landscape, some of these can be somewhat difficult to cultivate. The background photo here is actually of some plants that they can all hang out together. You don't really want them in your yard too much, like the Canadian goldenrod. We have some of the white, the heath aster. We have some tall eupatorium. We have New England aster. These can all fight it out amongst themselves and make a great pollinator buffet, but are probably best left to a large landscape and not so much a smaller landscape. And then there are some of the perennials that we love that reseed in the garden, and they're great for wildlife. And there are so many more species, but these are a few that I try to encourage as much as possible, quite honestly, unless the liatris, let's say, is in the foreground of the garden. I would rather have it in the background of the garden. But all of these species, there are so many different birds that will come and enjoy those seeds for much later, and realize that we're not just growing this for us, but we are growing this for the wildlife as well. And all of these species are great for not only the aesthetics, but the wildlife. And I'm sure we can argue all day about how well my echinacea patch is starting to become invasive. But honestly, on the grand scale of things, it's not nearly as bad as so many other plants. And the benefit, I think, outweighs any sort of detriment that it may be causing in the landscape. And then a little bit about sort of companion planting and planting like plants together. And that's kind of my definition of companion planting in this sense. Basically, planting something like spiderwort, like woodland spiderwort with wild sweet William. They flower at about the same time. They love the same sort of habitat, kind of this mixed sun shade, and they're both basically about the same size. Yeah, they'll kind of, run a little bit, sow themselves a little bit, but they play nicely together. And honestly, they play nicely in the landscape. So think about that when you're also landscaping, and think of the habits of some of these, having the more robust plants together with other robust plants. Having your ground covers with other ground covers. And also knowing how your ground covers grow. So both of these, while they spread out and they sort of occupy the same space above ground, they occupy a very different space below ground. So your Oenothera, your showy evening primrose here, the lighter pink, very much a stoloniferous, a rhizomatous spreader, spreads by roots. And so it will colonize all throughout a planting and show up in a number of different places. However, the purple poppy mallow it generates itself from one main taproot, and then it will send out its shoots above ground, and those above ground shoots could be as long as 6 feet long. So just knowing how they grow is important in how you would use them. Now, some of the problems with purple poppy mallow is, yes, it can climb over other plants, but in some cases it intermingles nicely with plants. Some of the problems with the Oenothera, it shows up in the middle of plants, but its foliage is as such that it never really shades out any other plants. So like I say, understanding how they grow is important in how you're going to use them. And then another thing with the companion planting is other plants can be used to support the plant. So for example, here, some of the native grasses are helping support the liatris in the background. And the aromatic aster there in the foreground, it's acting as a border to contain all of the taller foliage that is behind it. So utilizing those plants to their advantage. Basically, yeah, they're supporting one another, and the aromatic aster is forming that line and keeping everything else at bay. A little bit of notes on shrubs, and our time is going quick here. We're not going to, this is more about kind of the perennial landscape, but I do want to bring in some kind of maintenance notes on some shrubs, and these are shrubs that I've lived with for many years. You get to know their habits and their nuances. I love buttonbush. Have a nice queen buttonbush that is 12 to 15 feet tall and wide in my backyard, multiple trunks. I love it for the white flowers in June and just covered with various pollinating species. And then I love it for the seeds that the songbirds, especially the cardinals, come to in the wintertime. However, you will get a lot of dead here and there on your buttonbush, and you will be pruning out a lot of little twigs kind of year in and year out. And in some cases, after about 7 to 10 years, you'll actually have to start rejuvenating some of the trunks on your buttonbush. So just keep that in mind. Indigo bush, I love that one, not only for its very deep purple with the orange stamens, but then the smell is somewhat intoxicating. So it's one that I like to prune every year after the flower. For me, it reseeds itself pretty heavily, and those seeds really those seedlings really set into the garden. So the tap roots go deep. So any wildlife benefit that does have with the birds eating the seeds, which I don't think there is very much wildlife benefit. I would rather just get rid of the seed heads. So I end up pruning it back right after it flowers. And that way I don't have any seeds to contend with. And then it will just regrow again, and it will flower off of that new wood the next year. Elderberry, you can prune to the ground annually, and it'll send up new shoots, and it'll flower year in and year out. Or you could leave it as one very large shrub, and the flowers will be up at the 15-foot range and be arching over. So you could treat that a couple of different ways. Viburnums, just be careful if you're growing these for wildlife. You don't want to interrupt the berry cycle on them. And what I mean by that is don't prune them right after a flowering. Or if you do prune them judiciously, so you're not cutting off all of those flowers, soon to be berries for the birds. Wild hydrangeas, they can be cut completely down to the ground year in and year out, and they will emerge with new growth 3 to 4 feet tall and will flower on that new growth. Or you could just leave them and cut off the flower heads. That's what we do at our insectary garden at Kansas City Community Gardens. Is we just take the spent flower heads off of them and during the spring cleanup, and then let them grow a little bit taller that next year. So the big thing with this is, once again, kind of what are you utilizing the shrub for? Is it just for flowers, or is it also for the birds, or in some cases with elderberry, maybe you're using them for yourself. So elderberry jelly or elderberry wine, something like that. So yeah, just know the flowering cycle. And then as we kind of get into winter, of course you want to keep things up in winter just for the winter landscape. Just visually, it's very appealing. But also, as I mentioned earlier, there are so many seed heads. There's the wildlife needs food in the winter. The wildlife needs cover in the winter. So definitely do not cut your landscape down in the fall. Keep it up throughout the winter. Sometimes it can be very painful as you get into February and the landscape is all flopped over, and just you can trim some things back, but ideally wait until that March April time frame to do your cutting back. And here's kind of a little garden task list month by month, and of course this covers the basics basically, but you know, this is something I think, you know, it could be helpful for a lot of folks. The highlighted orange are kind of the busy months, and we are very much in the busy months right now. So, you know, from the cleanup to the dividing to the weeding to editing out some of your reseeded perennials from known aggressors. Known aggressors like stiff goldenrod, like aromatic aster, like New England aster. You know, this depends upon your garden, depends upon your soil type, and it depends upon sun conditions as opposed to, or in respect to what your known aggressor is in your yard. But then we have weeding. May and June, it's all about trimming things back. In May, here in a week or two, I will probably cut back all the seed heads of the roundleaf groundsel, just because, quite honestly, they do look pretty ugly after they've kind of browned out, and they're on the border of our garden, and so I'm going to go ahead and take those out just to keep it a little bit tidy. And then in June, you know, you're still cutting back, trimming back asters, trimming back goldenrods. And in some cases, depending on if you have too much of, let's say, columbine or penstemon, you may want to go ahead and remove those seed heads at this time too, because you don't want any more of those to show up. So this is a handy calendar, and of course this is going to go up on the website, so this can get referred to for the coming months. And then lastly, in November and December, you know, make sure you enjoy those fall plants. Even, you know, October, November, and December. Enjoy the colors, enjoy the wind, and enjoy making things for the holidays out of some of your native plants. So lastly, we have some resources, and of course, Deep Roots, you know, done a great job with just bundling a bunch of resources for native plants in the Kansas City area. Roy Diblick has the No Maintenance Perennial Garden, which you know, is pretty. It's a pretty good read. He talks about some good techniques to maintaining your patches of perennials, especially native perennials. And Sally Wasowski, which I just found out that she passed away this past December. So she has Gardening with Native Plants, a wonderful book, and it was kind of, oh, it was sort of an introduction to gardening with native plants. I got this book years ago. It's wonderful. Of course, Missouri Wildflower Nursery has their 4-star rating system. If you haven't been to Missouri Botanical Gardens Plant Finder, it's a very good resource. Of course, go down to the Discovery Center and take a look at the native plants there. And I invite you all to come over to Kansas City Community Gardens and see our insectary garden there at the community gardens. Really, I would say mid-May through the end of September, end of October, great time to see it. And lastly, do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Matt. There are lots of questions here in the Q&A, so I will try to get through as many of them here in just a few minutes as we can. The first and most popular question is from Andrea that wants to know, will we cut back cone flowers as well? Excuse me.
Yeah, so I tend to leave my cone flowers, and if we're talking about echinacea, I guess we could be talking about rudbeckia too. So I'm more likely to leave echinacea seed heads up just to feed the birds. So in some cases, yes, you can cut them back, and you may be able to instigate some other blossoms off of them, but more than likely, the blossoms that are instigated will be far inferior, so they'll be much smaller. I've always been of the school that once they've flowered, you go ahead and let the finches and they're the flying flowers that people talk about. Because the goldfinches will come in and they'll make pretty quick work of those seed heads. So I'm a proponent of leaving them. Now, on the other hand, when you're talking rudbeckia, another one of the cone flowers, you do actually see less bird activity on those, and it can be okay to go ahead and cut those down. In some cases, rudbeckia can be a little aggressive in the garden when it reseeds, and so yeah, that's one that you can cut it down.
Awesome, thanks. Next question is, should I shear mountain mint?
Well, what's the species of mountain mint?
This person did not ask, but if there's multiple, lots of people gave the question a thumbs up, so I bet people have.
Okay, yeah, I personally would give it the caveat that it spreads, but mountain mints are different than the culinary mints, where culinary mint will run underground and show up maybe 3 feet away from the mother plant. Mountain mint, you can see where it's growing. You can see its slow march, so it's kind of not as insidious, and it's really easy to divide off of it. If you do plant it, make sure you plant it with some other aggressive plants, just so it has something to fight against. Another thing is it's of course perfect for sort of an asphalt locked bed, something that is commonly referred to as the hell strip between the sidewalk and the street, or if you have a planter on the patio somewhere, you could just let that take over as a monoculture. But it plays, it plays fair in a native perennial garden. It's always going to be a favorite of mine just because of the biology that it brings in. There's just the mass of pollinators. So share it.
Gotcha. Another question on shearing. Nora wants to know if we should shear summer phlox.
Summer phlox, well, I don't know why you wouldn't. Most of the summer phloxes are kind of mid to back border, and just make sure that they have sort of good intentions to plant it there. But no, summer phlox, especially if you have other kind of pseudo aggressive perennials, it behaves itself.
Gotcha. Here is a great question from Val. What is the best resource for knowing which plants run before you find out in your garden?
Well, I would, yeah, because I know Missouri Wildflowers 4-star may not tell everything. I would think Plant Finder, the Missouri Botanical Gardens Plant Finder, would probably have pretty good specifics because they give good write-ups on most of their plants, and also Missouri Botanical Garden's been around for quite a while, and of course they help sponsor Shaw Nature Reserve out there in Gray's Summit, which is a wonderful repository of native plants. So I would hit them up as a web resource.
Good to know. Thank you. Emily says she's never used a hand cultivator. Can you go into more detail about how to use that?
Ah, yeah, I kind of wish I had it right here. So I wonder if I should try to back up on the slides. I don't know if yeah, no, it doesn't make sense to go back. So basically, you have sort of the mattic side, the flat kind of axe type side, which is great for chopping into plants. And then you have the actual 3 or 4 time cultivator, which is great for breaking up soil. So so the mattic part is good for getting the weeds out or making the divisions. The cultivator is good for once you put another plant in, or you're getting ready to plant another plant in, you're breaking up the edges of the soil so you don't have kind of that compacted soil around that the mattic part could be making, depending on your clay soil. But it's an incredibly handy tool.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. This next question is from Kathy Jones. She wants to know if we should cut back Joe Pye weed.
Yeah, so you can actually shear back Joe Pye weed this time of year, and it will bush out more, and you will get some more flower heads per square footage on the plant. So you can do that now. I would also, Joe Pye is one of those that I would probably, once it is done flowering, I would deadhead. Just given its aggressiveness in the garden. And I'm glad you asked the question, because it's one that I neglected to have out there. Joe Pye is just not one that I have in my garden and gardens that I have planted in the past. I've managed gardens that have had close cousins, actually brothers and sisters of Joe Pye, some of the other eupatoriums out there. And pretty much all eupatoriums are fairly aggressive plants in stature, and they reseed quite heavily. So if you do cut it back and let it flower, make sure you deadhead it in the end.
All right, and then we'll answer one last question before we wrap up tonight. Andrea says, really? Question mark. Cut down the asters? Question mark.
Yes, really. So yeah, I mean, over the past probably 2 weeks, I've been cutting back New England asters here and there. Have also been cutting back the aromatic asters. I have some various other asters in the backyard that I have also been cutting back. The perennial sunflowers needs to be done right now. Some of the goldenrods, it will be soon that you'll be cutting back some of the goldenrods. But yes, it really will help, especially some of these, and some of it depends upon your growing conditions. So if you have really great soil, those native plants are going to act like they're on steroids, and so they will need cutting back. And so it sounds like you might be one of those that maybe wants to cut back half the plant and leave the other half to grow out. But trust me on this one, you'll be glad that you cut the whole thing back.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you all for your wonderful questions. I'm so sorry we weren't able to get to more of them tonight. As we close the webinar here in a few moments, we hope you'll take our short survey following the webinar to help Matt and Deep Roots improve our programs. I'd also like to encourage you to visit us at deeproots.org. You can learn more about native plants, how you can support bees, butterflies, and more right outside your door. If you'd like to rewatch the recording of this session, or if you missed any recordings of our previous sessions, you can view those on our website as well. And while you're there, we would greatly appreciate your support in the form of a donation. You can find that button in the top right-hand corner of the screen. If you're anything like me, you probably cannot believe that there's only one more episode left in this series. So if you'd like to continue learning more about native plants all year long, you can check out our other webinar series at Native Plants at Noon. We host this series on the lunch hour every third Thursday, and native plant specialists Alex Daniel and Sydney Ross walk us through what's blooming now at the Discovery Center. This series has been a great hit as well, and we hope you're able to join us. We're also thrilled to announce the dates for our third annual Planet Native Conference. This will run from September 22nd to 24th of this year. Registrations will open soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And we do still have one more episode to go in this series. Next Thursday, Wendy Sangster will discuss native tree selection and care. That one's on May 25th. And that's all we have for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.